They took my children. But they forgot who I waste morning started like any other. Coffee brewing, the soft thrum of toast rising, and the sweet, overlapping voices of my kids Alex and Sophie arguing over who got the last waffle. It was the kind of chaos that made a house feel alive. Outside, the sun bathed our front lawn in gold. I stood in the kitchen, flipping through federal case notes, preparing for a long week in court. As a federal judge, life was always serious, but mornings like this, they were sacred. Until I heard the sound, skurker rustle, a sharp flick through the metal flap of our front door. I turned. A white envelope had been shoved through the mail slot. My heart sank. Another letter. HOA, I sighed, already knowing the rhythm of their complaints. Too many weeds, a mailbox shade that didn't match approved tones. Some obscure violation invented on a Tuesday night board meeting over lukewarm tea and too much entitlement. But this wasn't petty. As I unfolded the letter, my breath caught. Final warning. You are in violation of HOA residency requirements. Immediate eviction required. Unauthorized minors must be removed from the premises within 24 hours. Failure to comply will result in further action. My pulse quickened. I read it again, then again. Unauthorized minors. They meant my children. I stared at the letter, disbelief turning to slow. I see anger. My home, this beautiful 3-bedroom colonial, sat outside the HOA lines. My lawyer and I made sure of it during closing. I even had zoning maps filed with the county to prove it. They had no authority here. None. I grabbed my phone. Elliot, I said the moment my attorney picked up. We have a situation. He sighed. Let me guess, Willow Creek again. They've crossed a line, I said flatly. They're threatening to remove my kids. There was a long pause. Okay. That's not just a threat, that's delusional. We'll send a cease and desist today. He promised to handle it. I believed him, and I believed that would be the end of it. But I had underestimated something. These people weren't just on a power trip. They were dangerous. They didn't know who I was, but they were about to find out. It started the next day. I came home a little later than usual. Work had run over. I was still thinking about a tricky sentencing case when I pulled into the driveway. But something was off. The house was too quiet. Too still. I stepped inside. Alex, I called. Sophie, no answer. Just silence, a heavy, unnatural silence. I moved through the house quickly, checking rooms, corners, closets. Their backpacks still set by the door. Shoes lined up neatly, like they'd never left. Panic crept into my chest like a vice. I pulled out my phone. Straight to voicemail. Both of them. Then I started calling their friends. Then their schools. Nothing. No one had seen them since morning. My hands were shaking now. I called 911. Sir, the dispatcher asked calmly, are you reporting a missing persons case? My mouth was dry. My children, I rasped, they're gone. The next hours were a blur. Police swarmed the house. Officers combed the backyard. They asked questions over and over. When did I last see them? Any known enemies? Anything suspicious? I had enemies, sure. I'm a federal judge. I've ruled against cartel members, white-collar fraud rings, even political corruption cases. But nothing like this. Then one of the officers called out. He stood by my mailbox, holding something. Sir, he said. We found this. Another letter. It was taped to my front door. I took it from him, hands trembling. The words were typed in bold. As your unauthorized tenants have failed to vacate, the HOA has taken steps to ensure compliance. Your children will be held in a safe location until this matter is resolved. Time stopped. It was like my vision blurred. From rage, I had seen monsters in courtrooms. I had heard confessions from traffickers, arsonists, killers, but never had I seen a neighborhood board kidnap children. One of the officers stepped beside me, reading over my shoulder. Did your HOA just admit to taking your kids? I forced a breath. They did, I said quietly. And they have no idea who they're messing with. We went door to door. Police fanned out. Neighbors gave confused glances. Some looked away. But then came a whisper. Miss Harper, an elderly widow, to doors down, tugged gently at my sleeve. I saw something this morning, she whispered. To men, suits, not from around here. Your kids got into a black SUV. They didn't look scared, but they didn't look happy either. Where did they go? I asked, my voice tight. She glanced around nervously toward the horror clubhouse. That was all I needed. I turned to the officers. We're going now. The Willow Creek HOA clubhouse was a monument to overreach. Mahogany doors, columns that belonged in a courthouse, and inside, a woman who looked like she ran a kingdom instead of a neighborhood. Karen Wiles, president of the Willow Creek HOA. She smiled as we walked in. Judge Carter, she purred. We were expecting you. I slammed the letter on her desk. Where are my children? She didn't flinch. Your illegal tenants, she said, have been placed in a board-approved in-room guardianship facility until this matter is resolved. My fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. You've kidnapped my kids. Her smile thinned. We are enforcing residency compliance. I stared at her. This woman, so drunk on authority, so blind to her own delusion. I turned to the officers beside me. You heard her. She just admitted to detaining minors without consent. The lead officer stepped forward. Mrs. Wills, he said, voice firm, tell us where the children are, or you're going to be charged with unlawful detainment and conspiracy. Her mask cracked. For a second, the smugness faded. They're safe, she said quickly. Lakewood Christian Academy. I'll take you. But I was already moving. I didn't wait. I didn't speak. I ran. And as I drove, tires squealing, heart pounding, lights blurring past, only one thought rang in my head. They took my children. They made a fatal mistake. They thought it was just a rule. I knew it was a crime. I didn't stop at red lights. Didn't care about the speed limit. Every second counted. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own breathing and the sirens behind me. Police units racing to catch up as I flew through suburban streets. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Lakewood Christian Academy. That's where she said they were. That's where I would find them. Please God, I whispered under my breath. Let them be okay. When I screeched into the school's parking lot, I didn't wait for the engine to die. I jumped out. The door swung behind me. Half closed, half forgotten. Uniformed officers were right behind me, fanning out across the school grounds. The place looked normal. Parents picking up kids. Teachers chatting. A playground full of laughter. But somewhere inside, my children were being held. Like criminals, I stormed through the double doors into the front office. A gray-haired principal looked up from behind the counter, blinking in confusion at the squad of officers now filling the hallway. "What is the meaning of this?" he sputtered. The lead officer stepped forward. "Sir, do you have two minors here under custody of the Willow Creek HOA?" The principal hesitated, clearly flustered. "Ah, yes. But they were dropped off by men in suits with paperwork," they said. "Where are they?" I cut him off. He swallowed, then pointed down the hall. "Room 214. I didn't wait. I ran. The hole we blurred past. Room numbers flew by like ghosts. Room 210.12 to 214. I shoved the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. And there they were. Alex, Sophie, sitting into tiny desks, backpacks at their feet, eyes wide with confusion and fear. My heart exploded in my chest. I crossed the room in seconds, dropping to my knees, pulling them both into my arms. "Dad," Sophie sobbed, burying her face in my shoulder. "We didn't know what was happening," Alex whispered. They took us." "I'm here now," I said softly, cradling their heads. "I've got you. You're safe." Then, a voice behind me, cold, dismissive. "You have no right to be here." I turned. A woman in a navy pantsuit stood behind the teacher's desk, arms crossed. She looked like every overpaid compliance officer I'd ever seen, except this one had crossed the line into criminal terror. "These children," she said, "were placed under temporary HOA guardianship while a residency violation is reviewed." I stood slowly. My voice was so low the room fell still. "Shut up," she blinked. "Excuse me, shut up." My children clung to me. Behind me, officers were already stepping into the room. "You're not a guardian," I said. "You're not a judge. You're not even a social worker." I pointed straight at her chest. "You're a glorified clipboard with a superiority complex, and you are going to prison," she scoffed. "You can't be serious." "Mom," one of the officers interrupted, stepping forward. "Please, step away from the children." "I don't think you understand the legalities here," she said, smiling tightly. "We have board authority and signed mandates from "You're under arrest," the officer said flatly. "Unlawful detainment, conspiracy to commit kidnapping." "What? That's ridiculous." I was just following. Her words were cut short as the cuffs clicked shut behind her back. I gathered my kids close and walked out of that school without looking back. But I didn't feel relief. Not yet. Because I knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. That evening, I sat in my study, both kids asleep upstairs. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. Not yet. I called Elliot. "They just declared war," I said. He was silent for a moment. "You're going after them." I stared at the stack of horror letters still sitting on my desk. Threats, funds, petty rules, and now, kidnapping. "I'm going to bury them," I said. "Every last one of them." Elliot didn't even hesitate. "Good. I'll start drafting the filings." We weren't filing a complaint. We were launching a federal lawsuit. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse not as a judge, but as a father. As a man who had been pushed too far within ours. We filed the following charges against the Willow Creek HOA: kidnapping of minors, conspiracy to commit unlawful detainment, wire fraud, racketeering, abuse of authority under false jurisdiction. The HOA was not prepared. By lunchtime, the local news had already picked up the story. Neighborhood HOA president arrested in shocking child detainment scandal. I watched the footage on my phone as Karen Wills was escorted from her home in handcuffs. Her pearl necklace jostled as she screamed at the cameras. Her reign was over. But I wasn't satisfied. Because power like that doesn't exist in a vacuum. It festers, hides, regrows. So I went deeper. Subpoenas, financial audits, bank records, emails. You know what we found? Fraud. Years of it. The HOA had been a scam from the beginning. Fake maintenance charges, inflated contractor fees, shell companies funneling money into personal accounts. Karen had been paying herself a $60,000 management bonus out of HOA dues. The treasurer, using community funds to pay off gambling debts. The vice president, financing a lake house in Michigan. They weren't protecting the neighborhood. They were robbing it blind. And they thought no one would notice. They never expected a federal judge to live here. By the end of the week, the entire HOA board was facing indictment. Neighbors began whispering. Some came to my door in tears. They had been afraid, intimidated, fined into silence. Not anymore. I wasn't just fighting for my kids. I was fighting for every family they'd ever harassed. And now it was my court. My rules. And justice was finally coming home. They played HOA politics. I played federal law. By Monday morning, the courthouse lobby was full of reporters. Microphones, cameras, questions flying like bullets. Judge Carter, how do you respond to the Willow Creek kidnapping scandal? Is it true your children were detained without legal cause? Do you plan to remain a resident in the neighborhood? I didn't answer any of them, because this wasn't about PR. This was about justice. I walked straight past the flashing bulbs and noise into a courtroom I usually presided over. But today, I was the plaintiff. And today, they were the defendants. The court filings made headlines across the state. Carter versus Willow Creek HOA. Federal suit filed alleging racketeering, fraud, and kidnapping charges hit harder than anyone expected. Because once we crack open the HOA's finances, the whole rotten empire began to collapse. They'd violated state zoning laws, filed false liens, evicted single mothers and veterans under bogus clauses, even fined one elderly woman $1,200 for hanging wind chimes. But nothing hit the jury harder than what they did to my kids. We had the letter, the emails, testimonies from officers, even the principal's sworn statement. The HOA had acted like they were above the law. Now, they were drowning in it. But even as the walls closed in, they tried to fight back. They hired high-profile lawyers, men in $1,000 suits with plastic smiles and slick briefcases. They claimed I was biased, that I was abusing my judicial power, that this was a personal vendetta. I didn't flinch, because I knew the truth. This wasn't about personal revenge. This was about drawing a line in concrete for every HOA in America that thought they could rule through intimidation. 3 weeks into trial, a woman approached me in the parking lot. She was shaking, holding a stack of papers. "My name's Jennifer," she whispered. "They kicked me out of my home last year. said my garage door was the wrong color. But it wasn't. She handed me photos, emails, certified letters. It was all there. They'd forged complaints, filed fake violations, and sold her house at a massive profit to a pre-approved buyer who turned out to be Karen Will's cousin. Jennifer had lost everything, and she wasn't the only one. One by one, more neighbors came forward. The elderly couple from Maple Street, the single dad from Elm Court, even a retired Army colonel who'd been fined $300 a day for flying an American flag. They were tired, broken, but not afraid anymore, because they had someone in their corner now. The courtroom grew more packed every day. On week 4, the prosecution rested. The evidence was undeniable. Then Karen Wills took the stand, smug, unapologetic. "We were maintaining order," she said. "People like Judge Carter think they're above the rules. We were enforcing harmony." The room went silent. I stood, walked slowly to the center of the courtroom. "Is that what you call it?" I asked. "Harmony." She didn't respond. I turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just about fines and gross height. This is about what happens when unchecked power masquerades as civic duty." I looked back at Karen. "You kidnapped my children." Her jaw tightened. "You terrorized families. You exploited laws meant to protect communities. You used fear as leverage. But now," I leaned forward, "you answer to me." The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. Guilty. On all counts. Fraud, conspiracy, unlawful detainment, abuse of authority. The room erupted. Karen was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Her co-conspirators received 10 to 15. The Willow Creek HOA was officially dissolved under emergency order. All fines and liens issued under their tenure were nullified. Homes taken through shady evictions were returned to rightful owners, and restitution was ordered. Millions. But the story didn't end there. Because something unexpected happened. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years started talking again. Kids returned to parks without fear. Block parties resumed. The fear was gone. The fear they created. And in its place, something new grew. Respect. Hope. Community. A month later, I stood in my front yard. Alex rode his bike again. Sophie chased butterflies through sprinklers, and I watched them, arms folded, heart full. Miss Harper from down the street walked over with lemonade. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For all of us." I smiled. "You don't need to thank me." She nodded, eyes shining. "But we will anyway." That night, after I tucked my kids in, I opened my old case files. On the top page, I scribbled something in pen. HOA Reform Act proposal draft, cause this wasn't just about my neighborhood anymore. This was national. It was time to rewrite the rules, time to make sure this never happened again. Because they took my children, and I made sure they never forgot who I was. They took my children. I took their power. The trial ended. The verdicts were in. The sentences were handed down. But I wasn't done, because the real war had just begun. What happened in Willow Creek wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something bigger. Something spreading quietly through neighborhoods across the country. HOAs acting like private governments, funding people into bankruptcy, stealing homes, crushing the elderly with red tape, and worst of all, no oversight. They'd hidden in legal loopholes for years, wielded power without restraint, and the country had let it happen. Not anymore. Within days of the ruling, I was invited to speak at a national judicial conference in D.C. They gave me 20 minutes. I only needed 10. I didn't hold back. I told them what the horror did to my kids, how they manipulated laws meant to serve the people, how they operated like a cartel with newsletters and clipboards instead of guns. The room was silent. When I finished, then applause, not the polite kind, the standing kind, and in that moment, I knew this story had struck a nerve. The meteor picked it up. The judge who brought down the HOA mafia, a father, a federal court, and the end of a neighborhood tyranny. I became a face not of vengeance, but of resistance. Interview requests poured in. Advocacy groups reached out. Whistleblowers contacted my office daily. It was bigger than Willow Creek. It was national. So I drafted something bold. The Homeowner Protection and Accountability Act, mandatory state oversight for HOA letters, criminal penalties for abusive board practices, federal review boards for fines exceeding $1,000, a national database of board members under investigation. No more secrecy. No more unchecked power. I called it the Carter Bill. I flew to D.C. again, this time to testify before Congress. They packed the chamber. I stood there, not as a judge, not as a lawyer, but as a father. I want you to imagine, I told them. You come home to find your kids gone, taken not by criminals, but by people who claim to represent your community. I held up the letter Karen Wills left on my door. This is what horror authority looks like when it goes unchecked. I paused. And if you think it only happens in my zip code, you're wrong. I told them about Jennifer. About the veterans. The seniors. The single parents. I told them everything. The bill passed the House with overwhelming support. 2 weeks later it cleared the Senate. Unanimously. That almost never happens. The president signed it into law on a Monday morning. I didn't watch the ceremony. I was too busy coaching Alex's little league team. Because for the first time in a long time, life felt normal again. But something else was happening. I started getting letters. Hundreds. From across the country. People who had been abused by their HOAs, wrongfully fined. Evicted. Humiliated. And now they were fighting back. They were suing. Protesting. Reclaiming their rights. One woman in Ohio wrote, "They fined me for my daughter's wheelchair ramp. Said it violated the aesthetic guidelines. But thanks to your story, I fought back. And I won." A veteran in Florida. They tried to take my house because I refused to remove a flag I bled for. Not anymore. A single mom in Nevada. They stole my peace for years. But now, I know the law's on my side. The spark had become a fire. And I wasn't the only match. A month later, I stood at a town hall in Texas, invited to speak. As I looked out over the crowd, hundreds of families, activists, reporters, one thing became clear. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It belonged to every mother fined for her kids' chalk drawings, every veteran ticketed for flying a flag, every elderly couple harassed for weeds in their garden. They'd been silent for too long. But not anymore. When I returned home that night, I tucked my kids into bed. Sophie looked up at me. "Daddy, are the bad people gone now?" I kissed her forehead, most of them. She smiled. "Good," I didn't like that place anyway. I laughed softly. Neither did I. Outside, the neighborhood had changed, not because of laws, but because of fearlessness. People painted their homes the colors they wanted. Flew their flags, laughed louder, lived freer. And no one, not a single soul, dared leave another notice on my door again. Because they knew now, this wasn't just a house. It was a line in the sand. They wrote the rules. I rewrote the system. You'd think after federal court, Congress, and the president signing the Carter bill into law, the fight would be over. But monsters don't die in daylight. They retreat. Regroup. And return smarter, quieter, and more dangerous. Because what I dismantled in Willow Creek was only the surface. 3 weeks after the Carter bill passed, I received a package. No return address, no stamp. Inside was a USB drive. Encrypted. I had it scanned by a cyber forensics team. What they found, it chilled me. A network, a coordinated, organized system of private equity firms buying up HOA debt, using legal loopholes to acquire entire neighborhoods, running them like businesses with a whore board as the enforcers. It wasn't just Karen W. ILS. It was bigger than that. A $48 billion dollar industry. And behind it, a name I hadn't heard in years, Harlan Quinn. Harlan Quinn was a former DOJ analyst. Brilliant, ruthless, the kind of man who read federal code the way others read bedtime stories. He disappeared a decade ago, rumored to have gone private. Now, he was the architect behind a shadow system of shell companies managing thousands of HOA letters nationwide. He didn't serve on the boards. He owned them. I had a choice. Walk away. Enjoy my victory. Coach Alex's games. Watch Sophie learn piano. Live in peace. Or go deeper. Face the real empire. I made my decision before the sun rose. Some fights you don't choose, they choose you. I contacted the DOJ. Met with senior investigators. Shared everything, the drive, the patterns, the fake board members, the eviction, statistics. They opened an inquiry, but within 72 hours, it was shut down. Too many ties, too many donations. Too much money. That's when I realized, if I wanted this war won, I'd have to wage it outside the system. Just like they did, I pulled together a team. A former IRS auditor named Marlene, who could trace offshore funds like a bloodhound. 2 investigative journalists, banned from 3 states for uncovering municipal corruption. A cybersecurity expert who went by the alias Pike. And me, I was the scalpel. Not the sword. We worked in silence. No leaks. No interviews. No press. Just data. We map every HOA under shell ownership. Cross-referenced fines with foreclosures. Track deed transfers and internal memos. By the end of week 4, we had a 300-page dossier. Proof of racketeering, wire fraud, title laundering. Bribery. Enough to bring down a dozen firms. At the center of it, Quinn Holdings, LLC. Owned by a shell company in Delaware, which was owned by another in the Cayman Islands, which ultimately tied back to Harlan Quinn. The man behind the curtain. But we had one shot to bring it public, because you don't expose snakes by poking them, you burn down the grass. We chose a Sunday, the morning of the National HOA Leadership Convention. They were all their board members. Private investors. Lobbyists. all clapping politely under chandeliers, sipping imported wine. And then every screen in the ballroom lit up. One by one, the slides ruled. Eviction records with forged violations. Video of elderly residents crying over their seized homes. Email chains discussing how to manufacture vines to first sales. A chart showing 1,100 for families displaced over 18 months. Then, the final image. Harlan Quinn's face, his name, his offshore accounts, his control tree. The room fell silent. Then chaos. Phones rang. Security scrambled. Quinn stood up, expression like stone, and walked out. He knew it was over. The press got everything. Hours later, they called it the Quiet War. How one judge exposed a billion-dollar whore crime syndicate. Congress demanded hearings. The DOJ reopened their case. Arrests followed. Harlan Quinn disappeared. Some say he fled to Dubai. Others say he never made it out of the States. Either way, the empire was crumbling. 3 months later, I stood in front of my neighborhood again. Not as a judge, not as a crusader, but as a father who had finally closed the last chapter. The system that took my children was gone. The board that mocked my grief, imprisoned. The billion-dollar machine behind them, dismantled. Not with bullets, not with violence. But with truth. With law. With purpose. That night, I found a letter on my porch. No name, no address. It simply read, "You didn't just win, you rewrote the game." They tried to copy the tyrants. I taught them what justice feels like. After the Quinn empire fell, the system didn't vanish. It fractured. Where once there was one head, now there were dozens, smaller, smarter, meaner. They called themselves community renewal coalitions. New branding. Same playbook. They learned from Quinn's downfall. They stayed off the books, followed no public financials, recruited lawyers with clean records and cold souls, and most terrifying of all, they marketed themselves as saviors. We help communities protect their standards. We restore peace through structure. We're here to help. But I'd read those lines before. They are just newer versions of the same thread wrapped in polish. 6 months after the Carter bill passed, I began receiving letters again. But this time, they weren't from victims. They were from local leaders asking for help. Judge Carter, we're seeing fines spike again in North Carolina. They've rebranded in Phoenix and are back with a new board. They're targeting immigrants, now claiming language violations on signage. It wasn't over. Not yet. So I made a decision I hadn't made in 15 years. I took leave from the bench and I hit the road. I visited city after city, neighborhood after neighborhood, not as a judge, not as a politician. As a citizen, a father, a neighbor. A watchdog. In Sacramento, I helped a church community stop an HOA from bulldozing their food pantry. In Denver, I testified in a lawsuit where an HOA fined a single mother $300 a day for a cracked driveway. In Georgia, I stood beside a man who built a ramp for his wheelchair-bound wife and faced foreclosure. Because of it, each place told the same story. Corporate money. Private justice. Broken trust. But they also reveal something else. Coal and courage. People weren't afraid anymore because they knew they weren't alone. A movement began to grow, not a political one, a human one. We created a national nonprofit, Home Free, legal aid for HOA abuse victims. investigative training for community members, a hotline for anonymous tips. Within 90 days, we had 18,000 calls, not because people wanted a handout, but because they finally saw a way forward. But even movements attract enemies. The imitators didn't like being exposed. One night, after a town hall in Texas, I returned to my hotel room. Door ajar. Lights off. On the desk, a printed photo of my daughter's school. Below it, 3 words: walk away, Carter. I didn't sleep that night, but I did make a decision. They wanted silence. I gave them sound. I went live on national television the next morning. Someone sent me a threat last night, I said. They want me to stop speaking, to stop fighting, because it hurts their bottom line. I looked directly into the camera. I buried my silence when they took my children. I buried my fear when they tried to ruin my name. I buried my mercy when I saw what they did to families across this country. I paused. I'm not going anywhere. The video went viral. 15 million views in 24 hours. And something shifted again. Mayors spoke out. Governors passed emergency protections. State AGs launched investigations. It was no longer a few brave voices in courtrooms. It was thousands shouting together, "This is our home, and you don't get to write the rules anymore." 3 weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a copy of a foreclosure notice from 2019, signed by Karen Wills, stamped rescinded, and on the back, a handwritten note: "Took you long enough. Jennifer." I smiled. It reminded me this was never just about punishment. It was about restoration. Back in Willow Creek, things had changed. The new board was elected by the residents. No private contracts. No secret fines. No gatekeeping. They painted a mural in the Parker tribute to families that fought back. At the center, a scale of justice, held by a child's hand, Sophie's hand. That night, she asked me, "Daddy, are the bad people ever really gone?" I thought about it. Then replied, "No, but that doesn't matter." Why not? Because now the good people know how to fight. They gave me the spotlight. I lit the whole system on fire. Fame is a strange thing. It doesn't just open doors. It paints targets. After my speech went viral, the requests flooded in. News outlets, book deals. Talk shows. Everyone wanted the judge who took down the HOA letters. But fame comes with something worse than critics. Sycophants. People who wanted to be near the victory, not the fight. People who were activism like a fashion trend. And in that crowd was someone I never expected to betray me. Her name was Claire Halston. She was a rising star. Started as a volunteer in our home free network. Smart, relatable. She'd helped hundreds of families organize. I trusted her. We all did. Until I saw the documents. A whistleblower sent me us. Encrypted. Inside transfer records. Secret meetings with hedge fund liaisons. An offshore account with $2.8 million. It was Claire. She'd been feeding names from our hotline to a new corporate buyer network. So they could get to the communities first. Offer solutions. By silence. In some cases, seize deeds before anyone could defend themselves. She'd used our mission to build a business, and then she had the audacity to publish a memoir, The New Community Code. Her face on the cover. My name inside, not as a mentor, but as a warning. I stared at that book for hours. Not because I was angry, but because I realized the truth. Every system you try to fix will eventually try to absorb you. You don't just fight corruption. You have to guard your victories like they're made of glass. I didn't go to the media. I didn't issue a public takedown. Instead, I called her. Claire, we need to talk, she answered coolly. Knew it'd be you. You used those families. They were already lost cousins. They were people. Silence. Then she said, you created the brand. I monetized it. That's what real revolutions do. I hung up. And the next day, I gave the documents to a journalist named Marcus, the same one who'd helped me expose Quinn. Within a week, the story dropped. HOA crusader turned corporate mole. How Claire Halston betrayed the home free movement. Donations to her foundation were frozen. Her book was pulled from shelves. But most importantly, the communities she tried to sell out stood up. They organized without her, because now they knew how. But the betrayal shook me. Not because of the money, not because of the press, because it meant the disease we were fighting wasn't just out there anymore. I had crept inside. That's when I started to feel it, the burnout. The exhaustion, the weight. I hadn't been home in 11 months, hadn't watched Alex's soccer game, hadn't seen Sophie's latest drawing taped to the fridge. One night, I walked into the kitchen. She looked up and said, "Are you staying this time?" That question broke me, because I didn't know the answer. I'd become the face of justice, but I was losing the people I started this for. So I paused, took 60 days away from everything. No press, no hearings. No flights. Just home. Just them. During that time, something unexpected happened. Communities began defending each other. In Florida, one neighborhood raised money for another facing litigation. In Oregon, former HOA members trained others how to audit their boards. And in a moment that brought me to tears, a group in Nebraska painted a mural on a burned fence with the words, "We are the homeowners. We are the law." This wasn't about me anymore. That was the point. It never should have been. When I returned to public life, I gave one last address, not to lawmakers, not to the media, but to the people. You don't need a hero. You never did. I said, you just needed the tools. Justice is not a person. It's a habit. It's a pattern you repeat. A stand you take every time someone says, "This is just how it's done." I looked out over the crowd. I won't lead you anymore, because you don't need me. You are already leading. I stepped down from home free that night, and I went home for real this time. They tried to turn my victory into their business. They tried to sell justice as a brand. But they forgot I never wanted power. I wanted change. And change that belongs to the people now. I didn't burn the system down. I showed the world where the matches were. It's been 3 years since I stepped down. Since the lawsuits. Since the exposes. Since the threats stopped coming. But the fire we lit, it still burns. Not in anger. In awareness. The last time I walked through Willow Creek, it was different. Not because the houses had changed, but because the people had. Kids played without fear of being told their chalk art was a code violation. Our veteran sat on his porch, flag raised, knowing no fine was coming for him this time. And in the center of it all, a bench with a small plaque, For those who stood when it wasn't safe to. I didn't need my name on it. I knew who it was for. Sometimes I get asked what the hardest part was. The trials, the threats, the betrayals. No. It was convincing everyday people that they deserved to fight back, that they weren't troublemakers or ungrateful or non-compliant, that they were worthy of dignity, no matter how clean their lawn was, no matter the color of their fence, no matter the language they spoke. The HOA letters taught us to fear nonconformity. I taught them that fear had an expiration date, and it started the moment we stopped whispering. I still remember the night my daughter, Sophie, stood in front of her class for a school project. The prompt was simple. What does your parent do? She didn't say judge. She didn't say activist. She said, my dad helped people keep their homes. That was it. That was everything. There's a photo of her in my office now. She's older, braver than I ever was at her age. She wants to study law not because she wants to wear a robe or sit behind a bench, but because she believes justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you do. And Alex, he builds now real things. Homes. Ironically, says every nail he drives is one the system can't rip out again. Sometimes I get letters from strangers, from people who say, you gave us language. You gave us permission. You reminded us. We weren't crazy. But here's the truth. You were never crazy. You were never broken. You were baited. You were targeted. You were lied to. And still, you stood. That's the legacy. Not a bill, not a plaque, not even a movement, but awareness. Awareness that systems built on silence die in sunlight. Awareness that standard violations are just another name for gatekeeping. Awareness that power is shared, or it's stolen. I didn't save anyone. They saved each other. All I did was show them where the matches were and what not to burn. So if you're watching this, if you're stuck under a system that tells you to stay quiet, to fall in line, to accept your fate, listen to me carefully. You don't need permission to be free. You just need the courage to stand. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if you're standing alone. Because one voice yours can crack a wall that stood for decades. And once the cracks begin, they never stop spreading.